Next up, we have Professor Andy Lawrence, who's head of the Addiction Neuroscience Laboratory and heads the mental health research theme. Andy.
Thanks, David. Yes, it's the mental health theme is a very cohesive, very vibrant, inclusive group of researchers and students. We have a whole of theme meeting every month where everyone gets together. We've even been doing it during lockdown by Zoom. So we've been staying together as a group, understanding what we're all going through and understanding how our own research is coming along as well. We do, from a research perspective, we do everything from preclinical animal models of aspects of psychiatric disorders through to biomarker research, human postmortem brain analyses, and all the way through to clinical trials. And our research interests include developmental disorders such as autism, through to things such as eating disorders, drug and alcohol abuse, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, the major psychoses, and how stress can impact other underlying mental health issues. Next slide, please, Jackie. So our theme strengths, we've got a very strong behavioural neuroscience cohort. We've got very strong systems neuroscience as well, and the behavioural neuroscience and the systems neuroscience tend to work hand in hand. As I alluded to before, with human postmortem brain analysis and postmortem animal tissue analysis, we've got strong molecular psychiatry. Much of what we do is translationally relevant or translated. I have a clinical trial at St. Vincent's Hospital right now, and we approach and we adopt innovative methodology. You would have heard Chris talking about Lucy Palmer's imaging. We're developing a lot of imaging so that we can actually look at individual neurons or groups of neurons and how their activity relates in a particular circuit to a particular behaviour and how they respond to drug treatments as well. If I could have the next slide, please, Jackie. Go back one, please. That's it. Thanks. So our priorities. Well, my own personal area of research and interest is addiction and relapse, including eating disorders. My own personal research is predominantly drug and alcohol, but we do have other strong researchers also looking at eating disorders. We have a group of people that are very interested in the adolescent onset of anxiety and also how that can eventuate up into post-traumatic stress disorder. We also have a very strong group looking at cognitive dysfunction, and that can be both caused by genetic abnormalities or drug-induced cognitive dysfunction. And as I mentioned before, we have a group also looking at autism, amongst other things. If you can go to the next slide, please, Jackie. Here's just a few examples of some current projects available. The first one with Brian Dean is an example of the biomarker approach. So he's looking at both blood from people with schizophrenia, but also postmortem brain samples to look at the neuropathological mechanisms that underpin schizophrenia and to see if we can develop a biomarker to identify people with the disorder. My own personal research, as I mentioned before, is mechanisms, particularly neural mechanisms, circuit mechanisms that underpin relapse to drug and alcohol abuse. In this regard, I've got a clinical trial, a phase 2 clinical trial happening at St. Vincent's right now, targeting a system that I identified over 15 years ago as being critical for relapse to alcohol abuse. Tony Hannon and Thibaut Renoir are very interested in how gene-environment interactions and epigenetic mechanisms contribute to psychiatric disorders and may even be a part of the overcoming of some psychiatric disorders as well. Jess Nithyanand Tharaja is very interested in mapping developmental trajectories in cognitive function and looking at structural brain maturation through a range of very discrete touchscreen-based cognitive assays that have got very, very strong translational relevance. She's already shown that animals engineered with a mutation that mimics a mutation in humans with cognitive disorders, those animals show exactly the same cognitive deficits as the humans in equivalent species-specific paradigms, of course. And then Robin Brown is very interested particularly in diet-induced obesity, compulsive overeating, and eating disorders. So you can see there's a diversity, but there's also a cohesion around all of those research interests. I would commend you all to look on the website to the student projects, but as Ashley Bush mentioned earlier, if there's a project area that interests you, but not a specific project, I would still feel free to reach out to the investigators named and see if there's any option for flexibility.